Hello, and welcome to The Poetry Show with the Podcast Poets. This is a podcast that aims to bring poems and poetic discussion to people who love poetry, to those of you who aren't all that sure, and to poetry novices, and maybe we can inspire you to try a poem for yourself. A word of warning, we might curse, though probably not gratuitously, unless someone brings up Trumsky. We're kind of PG-13. So each week, we will discuss a theme and look at how 4 very different poets work within that theme to create a poem, and hopefully, we'll have something for everyone. So, we'll each do a poem, and we'll chat about that poem and move on to the next. I am Rose Drew, and we have
Alan Gillott.
And we have 2 guests today. We have Alicia Fernández.
Hello.
And we have Joe.
Hello.
Joe Williams, yay. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I have captured you from various Leeds and Harrogate open mics and dragged you here, and I'm all excited because this is fantastic. I've really been looking forward to this. This is great. All right. Today's show is about war and peace. Don't worry. We're not going to discuss Tolstoy, though maybe that would be kind of interesting. We are joined today by Alicia, who's been writing about the Spanish Civil War and how her family was involved. And I have a few poems on war, but not so many about peace. America's mental breakdown and war, endless war, began with 9/11. And Europe has been at war since, I don't know, the French Revolution, Crimean War, World War I, II, Cold War.
100 Years' War?
100 Years' War, exactly, right? Which
we
really lasted 100 and some odd.
French too.
Yeah, well, I know them people. But have we ever had peace? Is there peace? That'll be an interesting thing. We're here to discuss war and peace, but will we have any peace in there? I don't really know. So this is kind of World War I centenaries and such like, and I'm going to do a little poem called Wilfred Owen Takes Keats to War, which actually he did. Wilfred knowingly took the imagery of Keats and tried to bring it into an incongruous setting. A world tumbles from summer to war with a single shot. Well, 2. Ferdinand's wife, Sophie, also dies. Turmoil and poverty underpin the false peace of silver-stick parlors, the downstairs-upstairs dichotomy. Bullets will blemish the Colosseum, a smallpox spread by percussive powder, undoing in minutes what survived 2,000 years. A young Wilfred Owen worships Keats and his sensuous images of greenery, knights in shiny armor, magic and maidens. Truth is beauty, and beauty truth, or so we're told. But boys who'll never grow old show this a lie. No beauty on a battlefield. Some live, most die. So that is war. And so we have war, and war, but we are going to work to see if we can find the peace in there somewhere. I don't know. Do you you're looking at me, Alicia, so I'm going to stare right back at you. Have you read Keats? Are you familiar with
him? A little bit. We don't study him at high school or anything like that, as you do here, but I have, since I moved here, read a bit. I've always been a Smiths fan, so...
He's got long poems, doesn't he, Keats? Yeah. They go on like a book. There are 30 and 40 pages. He's like, I just can't get published, really? Because it's 500 pages long. I've done a bit. We looked at it a bit. But when we did an event in Rome for Keats is when I really settled down and started to read biography by Andrew Motion, his biography, a very good one, actually. That's an interesting book. But yeah, I wasn't necessarily familiar with that so much. I don't know. What do you think? You've read Keats, Joe?
Not really. Bits and pieces of lines here and there more than anything else, I think. It's just one of those things that kind of crops up from time to time. I don't think I've ever actually sat down and read a poem by Keats, but I'm not much of a scholar of poetry, really. I'm here by mistake as much as anything else.
Well, see, that's what I like that. Someone will put something up, and then Tim Ellis will chime in with, no, I hate that person. All right, I don't read Keats. I'm like, Tim, I love you. So it's really good because I'm not necessarily a poet scholar. I'm just I'm a shouty person who likes microphones. But yeah, no. So there's not a lot of familiarity with Keats. Alan, because you have that bit of a posh thing going on.
Well. Yes, we didn't do much Keats at school either. Although you and I did a Keats project, so we were enforced to do a little bit of Keats reading in the not too far distant past.
Right, exactly. So, but up until that point, what did you think of Keats? I mean, it's a lot of words. It's actually, I would also say, in a way, it can be elitist, because if you don't have a classical education, you're not necessarily, you know what I mean? Yeah, I mean, I can't hear it when you nod, though, because it's good, though. And if your brain was loose and rattled,
I do get that. Sometimes, like, since living here, obviously my writing has been developed here in English, even though Spanish is my mother tongue. So I constantly get asked, like, oh, have you read any Hughes, or have you read any Plath? And I'm like, well, I have, but my background in poetry is so different. Like I grew up studying Spanish and Latin American writers, really. So that is what is considered scholarly in Spain to have read them, and not Ted Hughes, for instance. So, yeah.
Well, we do have that idea, don't we? That the English poets or Shakespeare are just the world's best. Yeah.
I think a lot of people find Keats very daunting, and particularly when school involves an awful lot of Horatio on the Bridge and Homer and that group of poems, particularly the sort of rather I won't say bad translations, but very rhymey translations of ancient texts, which were never originally written in rhyme. So the whole thing for a young schoolboy whose thoughts do not tend towards poetry, it's very daunting, and it's something that you do your best to forget rapidly.
I suppose at the time when he was doing that, it would have been considered a modernisation, but of course we're talking about the 18th century, isn't it?
It's very Victorian.
Yes.
I mean, poetry long term has never been particularly rhymey.
Really? I had the sense it always was, or a lot of the.
It was syllabic rather than rhyming.
Okay.
Well, certainly the ancient stuff doesn't have anything like that in it. You don't get any rhymes in Virgil or Homer or anything like that.
See, I'm going back to the original when I don't rhyme. This is fantastic. No, so now I need to know, Alicia, what are some of your country's great poets?
Well, from my hometown, you have Lorca, Federico García Lorca, wonderful. And Alan spoke of reading poetry translations. One of the most wonderful things is reading Lorca in translation, side by side. It's fantastic. It's wonderful. If you read, there's a lovely Penguin edition of A Poet in New York, and you get poem against poem in English and in Spanish per page, and it's so lovely. He's one of the greatest. We had. Before the Spanish Civil War, we had what was called the Generation of 27, 1927. So it was a group of poets who ended up studying and living in the same hall of residence at university.
Oh, I love
and it's a wonderful generation of poetry, all very left-leaning. And Luis Cernuda, a lot of them ended up in Mexico in exile. During the war and the dictatorship, but
they did that here too, or the Bloomsbury group. I mean, there are often groups of people who live together and think and argue and screw each other and what have you, and all these other things. So when you see a side-by-side translation of Lorca to Lorca, are there differences, or does the translator often capture the sense?
There are. I mean, there are some. There always has to be a bit of a margin of error. So there's some imagery that is translated in a way that might be shocking for a Spanish speaker, but you can always see why. So, for instance, he always. The south of Spain, where he was from, is very green. You've got all those olive groves. So green is a very relatable colour. And he used it to represent death rather than hope. So maybe so when you're translating that, I mean, you can still use the word green in Spanish, obviously. Right. In English, sorry, why not? But it won't have all the same nuances, maybe because it won't be taking you back to the same scenery or it's the same kind of countryside, I'd say.
Well, but mold is green, so I could go along with that. I could get behind green.
I think the green in Spain is a very different. It's a darker. It's a darker, more intense green. I always remember, even in England, sort of coming back from Turkey and Greece, coming to England is green. But you think, oh, this is a vivid green, and then you go to Ireland, and it's like being hit in the face with the greenness of it.
Really,
it's very different.
I've not been. It's one of my sins.
So you can translate the words, but maybe not really the experience really, or the sense,
Right.
So an English person reading about green will be picturing something very different for me too.
Right, something very, very cheerful and spring-like, and the new buds on trees.
Wouldn't really get that except for in the north of Spain, near the Basque Country, and where it's wet and cool.
All right. So Joe, you're new to poetry also, or you've
relatively speaking, yes. I sort of fell into it, as I say, by mistake a couple of years ago, and here I am getting asked to be on things like this now. It's snowballed away there.
So, are you trying to catch up on your reading? Do you read other poets' work? I mean,
yes, I do now. I never did much at all in the past until I started meeting local poets, really, when I started going to open mics and the like.
Yes.
Which is a world that I never knew existed, really, sort of 3 years ago.
Right.
And having, I think it probably the way it normally works for people, once you discover one,
yes,
you start meeting people and suddenly you discover that there's 20 things going on that week.
Yes.
In easy travelling distance. And it snowballs again from there, doesn't it? You meet more people at these other events that you go to, and suddenly you know about 250 people who are all going to open mics and reading poems for you, selling you books, that sort of thing.
Well, do you know, the thing is, if someone says they don't want to read other poems, and some people are very against reading other poets' work, I don't quite understand that myself. I think it goes down to fear. You're afraid that it'll pollute your voice, or that you'll find that they've done something else you've done, but they've done it better. There's poets better than me. There will always be poets better than me. There's poets for less. It's a range. But if you don't want to read other books, you can go to open mics and have them read too. You're right. If you just
listening to people as well.
Yes.
It's the same thing. It's a different way of experiencing the same thing, isn't it?
Yes.
And I like to do both, but some people prefer one or the other. If you're reading something, at least you can read it twice straight away, can't you? It's a bit, you don't normally have someone doing an open mic and you immediately say, can you do that one again?
So I've had it happen when I've seen someone do that when they had a very short poem. But I think you and I were discussing earlier how you've got a poem that you'll read and read and read and read, and then you look back at the original and go, that's not the same thing.
Yeah, once you've done it on stage 25 times.
Yes.
And it somehow imperceptibly changes one word at a time.
Yes, and what I've done is I have two versions of I have two versions of a poem, and if I keep changing a word online, that's the new word for that online. Not online. For that in-person version, that one I read. All right. So actually, I'm focusing on you, Joe.
On me.
You. Do you have a poem for us?
I can do you a poem, which I think covers both war and peace.
Oh my! Okay, the gauntlet has been thrown down, Alan. Keep looking through that little thing you've got there.
It's a song. I won't give it too much introduction because it's quite long, but it's one that I wrote after the Brexit referendum last year, as should become apparent, and it's called "A Song for Europe." In 1588, the Spanish Navy came to fight, to claim the crown King Philip thought was his God-given right. Now millions of us fly to Spanish islands in the sun. The wars are long forgotten. The Armada is long gone. So sing for Europe, sing for peace, and sing to make amends. Let's raise a glass of sangria to all our Spanish friends. The French are nearer neighbours, and we fought against them too. Won victories at Agincourt, Trafalgar, Waterloo. But now we go for booze cruises and weekends of romance. Those battles are behind us. We've an entente now with France. So sing for Europe, sing for peace, and sing to make amends. Let's raise a glass of fine champagne to all our Gallic friends. And then it was the Germans who became our enemy. We fought them on the beaches, in the air, at land and sea. But now there's peace between us, and the wounds of war have healed. The battles that we fight today are on the football field. So sing for Europe, sing for peace, and sing to make amends. Let's raise a glass of Warsteiner to all our German friends. Now, Europe is united, and there's no more need for war. The Berlin Wall came down, the Iron Curtain is no more. Though Britain voted for divorce, said we should stand apart. Still, many of us here hold Europe fondly in our heart. So sing for Europe, sing for peace, and sing to make amends. Let's raise a cup of tea to all our European friends. Let's sing for Europe, sing for peace, and sing a sad farewell. To Europe and our friends there, here's to you. We wish you well.
Yes, that is going to be a fractured peace that turns into war. We hope not.
Yeah.
I know. I like that poem. I do.
Thank you.
I've heard that one before. It is a divorce. I think people who voted to leave think it's going to be one of those nice divorces where the people go on vacation together and the kids still frolic in a pool and they don't do bad things. But it could be one of those other kind of divorces, couldn't it, where they try to run each other off the road. And
Yes, I think we can see already which direction it's going, can't we?
I think it's very funny because
Mommy and Daddy are fighting in front of the friends. in front
in
of the kids.
1964, when we were squabbling about joining the European community as it was then, I remember writing in a college essay that the next European war will be a war of secession. And if we don't get ourselves sorted out, it could still happen.
Well, it's kind of what it is.
Yeah.
It might not be a war with guns and bombs as yet, but it's certainly a war, diplomatically speaking, and with the words, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I think only, 50% of our food in England is grown here in England. So we're going to have to fight to get the rest of it, aren't we? We're going to pay more, I think.
Oh, yes, just one of the many things that the Brexiteers never thought of or never told us about.
Yes, well, no, we're going to get $1 billion a month for the NHS, man. Don't you know that? $1 billion,
It's
man.
all true.
Yes, well, that sangria part will come true. That means blood.
There is that, yes.
Sangre.
Bloodshed.
All right, I'm going to go to our other guest. And then keep looking, Alan. I'll get to you eventually. I'll get to you. But, okay, now, first of all, let's address this, the elephant in the room. It's not Alicia, it's Alicia.
That's
so
it.
then when I went to Malaga, I was like, that's not going to TH. The hell's wrong with you? So it's Alicia.
That's it.
So the letter C is actually a th sound.
Exactly.
All right.
It is in Spain, not in Latin America. In Latin America, they do it as Alicia.
Exactly, because I used to do work on trabajo en Santa Maria, en Santo Domingo. Necesito hablar en español.
Muy bien.
Oui. No más. But yes. So it's all over Spain that the letter C.
No, it's really tricky. So you get southern Spain, where I'm from, in Andalusia. You get so you've got the east and the west. So in the east, it's say as Alicia,
right?
And then in the west, you've got very funny things. So there's Seville, where they would do it the Latin American way,
right?
And then there's Cádiz, where they do. Not only they say Alicia, but then every S sound they actually say like TH as well.
Really?
Yes.
So they don't even say the letter S?
No, so casa, which is house, they say caza. So it's... there are 40 sounds, 35 sounds that the human mouth can make, but we're trained to make the 20 to 25 when we're little. So that's why when you try to learn another language, you're like... So they don't really have an S sound. They spell it out, but they don't. Yeah, they don't pronounce it.
So if they were going to go somewhere where there's S all over the place, they would be struggling.
They would say sangria instead of sangria.
Okay, I love it. All right. Well, so do you have a war or a peace, or as Joe has deftly done, combine the two to remind us that once we became full of peace, we can now no longer go to Malaga on vacation? Fine.
I've got a poem. I've got a war poem, but I'm going to start with a poem about the beginning of war.
Ooh.
So
is it good for you to do them both in a row? Do they kind of blend?
Yes. Yeah.
Have them blend one to the next.
So I'll explain them a little bit. The first one's about a memory that my paternal grandmother had that she shared with me. She was only a kid when the Spanish Civil War started. At the outbreak of the war, she was at school, and then they heard this voice on the radio through the halls and through the speakers in the school, and all she knew as a kid, she was probably 10 or 11, is that they were dismissed for the day. So all the kids were ecstatic, screaming, shouting, so happy. They had absolutely no clue what was actually happening. So the poem's got a tiny sentence in Spanish, but it gets explained, so that's all right. And then I'm going to follow it by a war poem about my maternal grandfather, who started the war off. He was a land worker, and they had olive groves that they worked on, and they had a bakery as well in town. And so he started the war with the Republican army, and then halfway through the war he decided to change sides, which is an interesting story, and something that I was quite disappointed to find out. But then the more you read about the war, you realise that war makes good men make bad decisions, for all the wrong reasons, and then that's how war works, really. And when you have an army working towards a dictatorship and towards a certain regime, it creates this form of paternalism, I think, that lures people into thinking that they're probably going to be better off with the...
there's a reward system. There's definitely, that's what's going on right now in America. There's a reward system.
That's there. So I'm going to read these 2 poems.
Excellent.
First one's called Swallows. 17th of July, 1936, in the backwoods of an old room, hatchlings nesting on chairs, their hands foraging, grabbing the news as a present delivered by summer itself. Las tropas se han sublevado en África. Troops have revolted in Africa, a cavernous voice announcing the beginning of war. All classes dismissed until further notice, life put on hold. A southbound exodus of backpacks like dark swallows, slamming doors open, a disarray of page edges cutting the air, some birds molting their plumage, wings shuffling through corridors, a migration toward idleness, toward safety. And the next one's called Enemy Lines. You readied your body, battle-bruised and consumed, to run across the firing line in your muddy boots, carrying your musket on your shoulder. As your tattered skin sustained the sultriness of a Spanish July night, you took a leap of faith through a mist of bullets that whizzed by and landed decades from where you were. Your heart raced with you as you traded your copy of the manifesto for a Messiah's promise of no lack of bread. As you lurked in the shadows of a new world, the light of the world you had abandoned wept, and the silence of the barricade was only blemished by the sound of shotgun shells falling on the dirt. I wonder how you pictured the future then, when you had only the smell of your own piss and a monochrome photograph that you pressed tightly against your chest.
Did your mom, do you think, did she have a sense that things were going on? Like kids can hear stuff. Or did she was just taken? Do you think that the 10-year-olds were just taken by surprise?
My grandmother.
Your grandmother.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
I don't think she was aware. All the memories she had of wartime were really, really surreal. She told me as a kid she had this memory of her mother scraping lime off the wall because it's the only way they could get nutrients.
Oh my goodness!
So that's how poor.
Well, there's a saying in America called "dirt poor" because you eat the dirt.
That's the state that the country was in.
Right. Before the war.
During the war. Yeah, but
okay.
that's the Spain that the war left behind. So men were at war and families were left at home on their own with not much of a livelihood, really.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
So yeah.
So and yes, your grandmother. Sorry, my mother was born around that year. So
my mother wasn't born at the time.
I was looking at going, dang, you look good. All right. So so they may not have had an inkling of it. And then your grandfather just said, forget it. You know, that is, I think, how people are just are lured to another side. Mm-hmm. I mean, look what's gone on into the Middle East. Come, we're going to start a whole new state. It's going to be great. And then possibly not so much. Mm-hmm. That is amazing. How many do you have? You have many poems? Or are you just examining this?
I'm starting to. I've got one more that I brought on the topic. I'm starting to try and work towards a series. Yeah. It's hard to find the right balance of involvement and historical. So I'm trying. So for example, in the one about my grandfather, I speak in the first person, but I'm trying to do that as little as possible. Not because they're not poems about personal experiences, so that there's not really much room for the I there. So I'm trying to get rid of that a bit and find a good balance between events and the fact that it's personal as well, because it's my family and
true.
And I lived in the aftermath of all that. So both my grandparents survived the war, luckily, so I met them both, and so I do have a personal investment in the story as well. But
sometimes when you do this kind of stuff, though, in first person, what do you think, Alan? And in a way, it makes the reader go, wow, what would I have done? So sometimes the first person...
I think there's a difference here too, because the wars which we've been involved with in England have always been somewhere else, albeit in France, albeit in Germany.
Oh, God, yes.
We had bombs, but your war was a civil war, which meant people were not in the fields. They were not harvesting. They were not doing the food production. So the famine was inevitable. And I start remembering some of the ancient wars in Britain where we had our own civil war. And,
God.
Things like hunger, and we had the harrowing of the north, and all sorts
the rich and powerful do that.
Things.
They harrow by killing the peasants and destroying their food. So it's the peasants who starve.
Yes, it's the underdogs who suffer in all wars.
Absolutely.
But I think I think that's the immediacy of what you're doing. Is it's bringing to us in English that sense of what happens if the war is going on around us.
What if it comes home to us?
Yes,
like literally up the hill, running across.
This is what suddenly scared the Americans, because all of a sudden they realised that the wars that they've been busy promoting somewhere else are coming home to roost.
Closer than they think.
That's what I said in the beginning. America's mental breakdown started with 9/11.
Yeah.
I mean, really, I saw a play years ago called Patient Number 1. Yeah. And the plane that the president normally flies in, unless you are very wealthy and want your own plane, is called Air Force One. And so it's always one, Air Force One. And so the play was about Patient One. It's about it was a surrealistic play about George Bush, the junior, the one who started all the wars after 9/11, going to a psychiatrist in Florida. And he's no longer president. Condoleezza Rice and the rest of them been getting arrested and charged with war crimes. Wouldn't it have been nice? I digress. So the psychiatrist at one point looks at him and says, sometimes people don't just have a nervous breakdown. Sometimes entire countries have a nervous breakdown too. And the thesis of the play is that America is in the middle of a post-traumatic stress disorder. It's national.
Yeah,
it's like a national illness, and that's why they're overreactive and guns everywhere, and they hate the other.
He's not wrong.
No, I think he's absolutely no. And I saw that play in 2004 or 2005. Yes. I've never been able to get out of my head, ever. And it showed up. It was at the York Theatre Royal, and it's gone. I need to find a playwright and say, bring this back. So I don't know. I think a series of poems I want more of those, definitely. Do you have something to say, Joe? You're just staring at me. No.
I'm just thinking about sort of those ideas about the national nervous breakdown and the war on your doorstep. Although it might not be something that we've seen here for a long time, there are other recent examples that are so close to us, like Bosnia and Serbia is the obvious one to think of, which is probably very similar to the Spanish Civil War in terms of the way that it tore the country apart.
Yes.
And the way that neighbours were pitted against each other. Mm-hmm. And
people that you knew, suddenly just ratting you out, which would go back to World War II and what Germany did back then. Does not anymore. Good. Angela Merkel. Good. But back then in the 30s, going in where the neighbours would just rat out the neighbours to stay alive, to stay safe. Right. Mr. Allen. Doth thou have war or peace?
Yes,
or war and peace? Only
I'm going
Joe
to do,
so far.
Well, I've got two selected.
The bar is high.
The first one I'm going to do has elements of peace, probably more elements of hope than peace.
Okay,
it's involved.
Like that.
This one is called Justice for Injustice. Memories linger, still vivid, at the dawn of another phoenix, when the ancient barbarity, the exchange of kings livid with innocence floats the Styx, and even Charon weeps with pity. There is no honest denial that poverty and greed leeches life and promotes injustice, nor that desperate trial provokes that hate which reaches the riders of the cockatrice. But that does not excuse or justify jubilant kill, exchanging sadness with sadness in a frenzy of mutual abuse, where the path of honour still champions the way of madness. For it is indeed honourable to extend the hand of trust, that together we may truly mourn lives lost to poverty, and enable together, rich in friendship, to thrust against injustice and equality with reform.
So, are you going to follow that with another one, or do you want to just discuss that one? What was that? When did you write that one exactly? When?
That was very shortly after 9/11.
Yes.
because that was around. It was around that time, and I'd sort of been bitching and moaning about the 9/11 itself, and I thought it needs a counterbalance. It can't all be hate and response and revenge. You have to have another point of view.
Well, yeah, there's that. I mean, you and I both are unique in the room. But 9/11 happened every night here in England, and I think people in America don't understand that. Bombs fell all the time. Buildings burned down all the time. Your neighbors vanished all the time, all over the place. But you sat there in a boat and watched the buildings burn. We could smell the buildings burn for months because it's a bunch of big buildings, and they were very deep. The garages went down 20 and 30 floors, and they burned for a long time. And I have a long poem, which I may not get to, but I wave away the easy wish to see their whole country, collaterals and all, paved over by blacktop, which is tarmac in America. Believers by heart or gunpoint, only a collateral shop or school away from era, burked beneath beards and fear and robes. But sometimes I want blacktop and a parking lot. So there is that feeling that you do, just like, even though it's not them who's done it, it's these guys, they got on an airplane, my God. But you watched it, didn't you? And so that affects us. You lost jobs because of it. We lost friends. We lost people. My daughter's friend's dad went to work and didn't come home. So what was that for you to see that? I mean, that was your first experience of a war incident.
It's very surreal. I mean, I occasionally play that day over in my head like a video reel.
Yes,
and that's really all it is in a sense, because there's no engagement. You just see the event.
Yes,
you see the event. You see the video of the video, essentially, because you're looking at a screen of the events and you're looking at people numb with shock.
Yes,
you're looking at people basically being told to go home.
Yes.
There's no point in staying at the office. Nobody's going to do any work.
Right.
So that was there. But the video also includes that response. So, for example, the event with Bernier Dance, when they did that.
Yeah.
Some of those wonderful, wonderful pieces of dance, which brought up the names of everybody who died.
Yes. In Connecticut.
Yeah.
It took us 20 minutes to read the names.
And I think that was it. Connecticut. Well, you can write Connecticut, New Jersey, and some of the lower parts of New York were devastated because there's very few people who did not have a relative or friend who wasn't killed.
Yes.
So it affected everybody. Probably the last time America felt that was during the Second World War, when everybody was related to somebody.
And then GW squandered all that. We actually had China sending us get well cards. We had a Chinese warship passed an American warship, and the Chinese held up American flags, and seriously, they held up signs, literally, almost practically saying "Get well soon." They held them up as they went by, and George Dinh went after the wrong country. Because that makes sense.
The whole. It was an opportunity to. Put everything right, and it was just thrown away because the American Republican Party is all about destruction and bullying and evil.
So war
precedent at the time helped them out.
Yes,
as well, sadly.
And here in England too, Tony Blair.
Yeah, Aznar, Tony Blair, and Bush. That famous picture of the three of them in the Azores. Discussing what the best way about it was.
I always think of Tony Blair
for a nice meal.
Come here, boy.
Best bomb.
Here's Blair. Come on, Blair. Come on up, Blair. He became a lapdog, didn't he? Just a bit,
They were trying to emulate that famous meeting in the somewhere near the Azores on the battleship where Truman and Churchill and
they had this moment in their mind
in the Atlantic to talk about the war, and I think that's what they were trying to emulate.
That's it. But they couldn't get a guy with a flag to go climbing up a bunch of people and stick it in that was what it was. That was it.
I think that's what they were trying to do.
They wanted paintings. They wanted giant paintings. That was a fail.
I'm going to do another one, which is about another aspect of war, which is a lot more worrying, which is this tendency now to conduct our wars remotely. Not just remotely in other countries, but remotely in our own countries. And
this is horrible.
That's really scary.
This is, yes.
And this one is called Collateral Damage. There was a time when Collateral was the flyers and fact sheets, brochures and booklets prepared to boost the sales of this concept or that creation, packed with useful and useless information, couched in impenetrable jargon with features and benefits to ensure that this, and only this, is the product to buy. Then we went to war. But a clean war with laser guidance and infrared bombs and missiles, killing only the wicked and sinful, the evil and malevolent deemed to deserve to die. We learned also a new word in the lexicon of war: collateral. Collateral damage, the hurt and pain of those supporting sellers of terror, its features and benefits, dead and maimed, even though they did not know or could not break the ancient duty of hospitality and protection that binds desert peoples, mothers and wives, children and teachers, weak and helpless, trapped in a time and place not of their choosing, slaves scratching a living from the desert scrub or arid pastures, dead and maimed because they were there. Collateral damage ignored in the collateral for this clean and sanctified war of pious theft, collateral damage. Were we not more honest when we sent our bombers over Germany and France to obliterate every man, woman and even child, factory and wagon, every road and railway track in Caen, in Dresden? There was no guilt or fancy words. Death was dealt indiscriminately, and there was no talk of collateral damage. Nor when bombs rained down on Vietnamese forests with Agent Orange. There was no talk of collateral damage, just of death and destruction, and strategic advantage, the proper language for the art of war. Now we face a new great dishonesty, executing a skirmish without putting so much of one's own in harm's way, commanders concerned no longer of the ethics of whether the target, the risk to lives, but a target without risk is a target without value, and any target of no value is worth the price of no risk, and that target need no longer be an enemy, but an execution of friends and neighbours, inconveniently near an enemy of the state. Collateral damage. You.
Yes. There was footage, it might be a film or it might be real, where these two guys are looking at I think it's a dog. No, I think it's a guy. No, I think it's a dog. And I hit a button. Oh, I think it was a kid. But they just push a button. They're in the middle of, I don't know, they could be anywhere. Yeah. Arizona. They could be in the middle of anywhere in the U.S. And they have a screen, and they see people walking around, and they just push a button. And I think you're right. There is zero risk. So that's just a video game, isn't it? It just doesn't matter.
Yeah, I was thinking of something similar to that a different video, I think, but one that I remember seeing. I think it was in Iraq. It must have been in the 2000s. And it's a couple of guys in an American attack helicopter who are tracking a truck that's driving through the desert, and they suspect that there's an Iraqi suicide bomber or something in there. Can't remember the details. And these guys end up getting out of the van and running for cover because they know obviously that the helicopter's following them, and they take out these guys with a Hellfire missile or something. Yeah. And they're doing it. It's like playing a computer game.
Yes.
And this video obviously wasn't meant to come out. It's something that got leaked.
Yes.
And ended up in the public domain.
Yes, and it could be a guy, it could be a dad, it could be his sons, it could be anyone. It could be anyone.
I think the real thing is that, the thing that bothers me is I can understand you having to take out a high-value target and Osama bin Laden and use some sort of remote technology to do that. But the reality is when a general has to sit down and say, I have to risk 20 guys and their lives to go and deal with this problem, you're actually putting a value. The value on the target is 20 lives. But when there's no risk, then the value of the target drops. And it could be next week, it could be the drug dealer just down the road. And that's the thing that what we're doing is as soon as this technology, a drone technology essentially, what's recently someone's just produced a drone that will carry a machine gun and can shoot people on a low value drone.
The drone is low value, but so are the people that are getting shot.
But that is that's the downside. The price of justice suddenly becomes zero, and it's scary because you can imagine Britain is in a particular problem. We have a Conservative government who's creating an atmosphere of revolution, but at the same time they're taking all the money away from the police and the armed forces.
Oh, so that has not worked well, has it?
They have absolutely no method of controlling the population if we get a bit antsy about Brexit. What will they do? They will turn to the next level of technology down.
Well, that's what they're going to do in America, and they can justify it. Every time someone is shot, probably someone of color, the cops they have the not unreasonable assumption that the person has a gun because there are 300 million guns in America. There are 300 million people in America. Not everyone has one, but it's not impossible. So that has led, because I used to think, why did they leave the peasants armed? Because then you have a probable cause. And they can just take out anyone. And the collateral damage, I have a very long poem. I won't do it now, but it does use the word collateral damage throughout it, and I think that's the point. But in my house in Connecticut, if they'd wanted to get someone living on the top floor, they'd have just bombed the house with me and Emily and Alan or whatever, and with gardening or whatever. If they needed to get that person, that's the point, isn't it?
And they've still called it a precision strike.
Yes, sewing, like it's just precision. We did, because they only wiped out my house and 3 others next to me.
I think that's what hits the nail in Alan's poem. We live in a culture of euphemism.
Yes,
it's appalling. It's everywhere, and whether it's literal war or then any other form of. I mean, on mainland Europe, we see a lot. We've got the European Union. It's another form of warfare. I think it's social warfare. It's pretty much financial terrorism, but they don't call it that. They just
social cleansing.
They force Greece into borrowing money from them, and they call it a bailout.
Oh, I know. I hate that.
It's all positive language. We're rescuing you. We're helping you. No, you're tearing us apart. You're not helping in any way.
But I think returning to drones, I think that drones are as evil as landmines, and they should be
indiscriminate.
They should be outlawed by the UN.
It's very scary, everything because that we've got coming. So 21st
war should
century
at least have a cost to you.
Yeah, no, I think that is the problem, that there is no actual cost. Well, we've taken it to a grim theme. So, but war and peace. When you have war in a title, I don't know. So. I think we should probably try to wrap it up. Does anyone have one more small poem that they should put in? Yes, Alicia.
I can give you a short one. Oh, sorry.
Yes, okay. No. And Joe. All right. Let's hear from Joe.
They're both quite short, aren't they?
Yes.
So.
I'll do this one, which is it's one of those where the reader or the listener really has to make up their own backstory to work out what's going on. So whether you consider it on theme is perhaps a question. It's called Landing. The place where we landed seemed good. There was water and food and air. But others were there before us, and they told us we couldn't stay.
Mm-hmm.
There's no room here, they said. We can't help you. So we, the last humans, went back to our ship and continued our search for a home.
Yes. Oh, yes, exactly. And that just had the thought pop back into my head. One reason why we can use drones to kill anyone is because we're all scroungers. That's the other language. We've cheapened life in general. But that's the future, isn't it, Joe?
Well, it could be. It depends.
Take your little ship and get out of here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are we going in this direction?
I think so.
What will bring that to pass? Who knows?
There'll be chimpanzees with machine guns, and there'll be the Statue of Liberty half out of the. No, that's a different.
This sounds like you could make a film out of that, Rose.
I think you could, right? Yeah.
What should we call it?
I don't know. There'd be a planet with apes.
Something about that. Something like that. We'll work on it later.
Yeah. Okay. Let's work on it. Okay. Note to self. And Alicia, the last word for you, then I'm going to wrap it up.
Okay.
I think.
Oh, that's quite the responsibility.
Yes. So no pressure, but you have to be perfect.
Well,
no pressure.
You mentioned before when we were talking about strategies of war and how these regimes are built, and you talked about it's created. This culture is created of ratting people out.
Yes.
Ratting? Is that the word? Ratting people out, and that's going to have a benefit for you. And at the end of the Spanish Civil War, when the fascist section of the war won, they self-entitled themselves to a 40-year dictatorship, and then not happy with that, they charged people from the defeated side with tasks, generally hard labor, but much more horrible stuff. So my paternal grandfather, who fought with the communist side of the war, was in part of a battalion that was charged with just basically chasing people out in the woods from their own side. I don't know how my grandfather always said he spent 3 years shooting up in the air, and he doesn't know how he made it out alive. So if he wasn't even comfortable holding a rifle, imagine having to chase people. So this is a poem about that, and it's called The Hunt. After the end of the war, men were arranged into battalions to provide service to the regime, reconstructing cities torn by bombs or building colossal mausoleums. Some were unleashed under command to track the scent of defeat along forest trails, bearing on their withers the humiliation of hunting their own comrades. Their nostrils stretched in the dark night for a hint of fear, in search for a fugitive quarry to bring back in order to save their life. Maybe some of them turned a blind eye on the presence of a prey among the trees, ignored their heavy breathing so as to preserve their own dignity, or whatever glance of dignity could remain among a squadron of bloodhounds.
Oof. Yes. All right. If we're not hovering over other planets like Joe, we're going to be doing what you are saying there, I think. Just to survive, aren't we? Just aren't. Oh my goodness. So, come back next time when we're going to talk about fun stuff. I swear to God. Please come back. It'll be fun. We're going to have fun. All right. So you know what? You too, listeners, can get involved and send us some ideas for themes and topics that you would like to hear us discuss. So come back next time when we might be discussing seasons or death again, because I love it, or sleep or profits. Or profits. It could be a PH or an F. I don't know. So whatever you send in or whatever we decide to discuss. We have been The Poetry Show, and we are the Podcast Poets. You can tweet to us on Twitter at Podcast Poets, email us at podcast@podpoets.com, and find us on iTunes and give us those reviews and ratings. This has been The Poetry Show, produced and edited by Adam Taglietti as a production of Eden Agency.